Alright guys, how to set up a 2-camera interview on a budget. So the main thing here is going to be the cost of the cameras, because the tripods, or however you're stabilizing the camera, like framing it or whatever, tripod stuff is probably going to be pretty cheap. But when it comes to the actual cameras itself, this is the part that's going to do most of the budget. What's the camera, what's the lens, right? The audio stuff doesn't have to be super expensive, because if you want to get like super budget with it, you could even just run a really long cable to a lav mic from the camera. Now, depending on the quality of the cable and stuff like that, I'm not going to make any guarantees to what the audio quality would be. If you want to kind of save some hassle and have a bit more ease of use, just invest in like a wireless mic system, whether it's by Comica or Rode or whatever. Those little tiny mic, receiver and transmitter systems. If you just get one where it's like one receiver and 2 of those wireless mic units, and just kind of get that, and then you and the person that you're interviewing both have one of those mics on them, whether you're just having the little thing clipped there or whether you're having a lav mic clipped onto the shirt, whatever you're doing. In terms of the cameras, something to keep in mind: does the camera have a recording limit? If it does and there's no way to take that off, is that something you're going to want to use as your camera? Because if it's got a recording limit of 30 minutes and you talk for an hour and that camera shuts off halfway through, not great. Not great. So try to find something that doesn't have a recording limit, or at the very least has a pretty generous recording limit, whether it's like 12 hours or whatever. Like, recording limits on modern cameras, I think, are becoming less and less of a thing. But on older cameras for video, it's probably more common, right? Depending on certain cameras and stuff like that or whatever. But also, does your camera setup, do the cameras have a mic jack, like a mic input, or are you going to have to record audio separately? Depending on how much you want to spend in the post-production editing process, if you don't want to have to sync up audio in post, then you're probably going to want to get cameras that have a mic input on them, so you can just plug the mics into the cameras, right? And again, when I talked about getting that mic transmitter receiver system earlier, you're using 2 cameras, but you only have 1 receiver for those 2 mics. So you're like, okay, how do I plug this into both cameras? You don't necessarily have to, but you could. Because you could either get like as far as I understand, I'm pretty sure this would work. I don't know if I've actually tried this, but you could get like a splitter, like a headphone jack splitter, and just send the same transmitter feed to both camera audio inputs. Or you could even just have the receiver on one camera and that's getting all the audio, and then you just use like the onboard audio of the other camera to sync them up in post so the cameras are on the same timing, and then you could just use the audio just from the one camera, and then all you're doing is switching between video angles. But if you want to do the audio for each person on their respective cameras, then just set up the mic system or the wiring system to do that in the ways that I've said, or in other ways or whatever. And so like one of the questions is, how much work do you want to do in post-production? If you want it as simple as possible, you're probably going to want all the audio going into the cameras. You're going to want the cameras just recording. There's even ways that you could set this up if you wanted to have like auto camera switching. That gets a bit more complex and a bit more expensive in how it's set up. Not insane, but it's going to be a little bit more cost than if you're just filming on your cameras. And you also need to make sure that your cameras ideally have a clean HDMI output, which means that like you're outputting just like the camera feed with no overlays or anything like that. That might also narrow down the range of cameras that you can look at for what you're doing. And also, okay, so if you've got all this stuff, does the autofocus matter, or do you want to just manually set the focus? If the person's sitting in a chair and you pick your aperture well, maybe you could just set the focus on the person when they're in the chair and then just leave it. Because again, what's your price? Can you afford 2 cameras that have good autofocus, or can you just afford cameras that, are just a bit more not so great with the autofocus, but it's good enough? Or maybe you're just going to use it in manual mode. Also with the lenses, depending on the camera that you're using, what are the lens options? Do you have enough money to buy good lenses for the camera, like good electronic lenses if you want to use the autofocus, and that have the right focal length, or if it's a zoom lens, the right zoom range, a good aperture depending on how much background blur you want. If you want a lot of background blur, you're going to want something that has a tiny aperture number, so like a 2.8 or a 1.8 or something like that. But then you're going to have to think, okay, I'm probably going to want something with good autofocus in case the person moves slightly while they're talking, because you ideally don't want to have the face blurred out, right? So, things to consider. But let's say you don't have a lot of money for autofocus lenses and all this stuff and stuff with the high apertures. So then maybe you adapt vintage lenses to your cameras and you just have them at an aperture where the person's going to be roughly in focus because of, the depth of focus, or the depth of field rather, the whole time that you're filming, right? So maybe you get a vintage lens, put it on like, f2.8 or f4 or whatever like that, and you just kind of set it. Again, how much background blur, it depends on your focal length and what the aperture is. It depends on the size of the sensor on your camera. If you want a lot of background blur, full frame sensor with an aperture of like 2.8 or smaller, in terms of smaller number. I'm trying to say aperture in a way that's like really easy to understand kind of right away just by looking at it, because I think high aperture technically means a lower number, I think, but I'm just trying to say tiny aperture number. So when you see a tiny number like a 1.8, you're like, that is more blurry than an 8 or a 12 would be, right? So try to explain it like that. So if budget doesn't matter, you could just get like some really good stuff, like Sony A7S3s, full frame cameras, right? You just put like some good G Master, E-mount Sony lenses on there, good autofocus, small aperture number. So then, blurry background, the autofocus tracks them and stuff like that. But you're going to be talking probably thousands of dollars, right? If you want to go like super budget mode, like we're talking like super budget mode, either maybe you want to do like Panasonic GH2, and then put on, okay, it's up to you if you want to put the Panasonic camera hack software onto it, but do that at your own risk, because maybe it might cause damage to the camera, or maybe there's a risk that it could damage the camera. I'm not an expert on the camera software hack stuff, so that is completely up to you if you choose to do that. Consequences, whatever, that's on you. But if you just want to get just a camera without having to worry about any of that software stuff, then just like, I'm pretty sure, I assume that the Panasonic GH2 has no recording limit. Feel free to look that up. I think that's the case. If that's the case, go with that camera. Probably get it cheap on eBay. I think you can get it for around $200 to $300 Canadian. I could be wrong. As far as I understand, like the mic input on it is good enough. Again, I could be wrong. Feel free to look up a review on the Panasonic GH2, but it might be a good pick because you can get two of them pretty cheap. Micro Four Thirds sensor, so not good in low light usually. Again, depending on how new or old the Micro Four Thirds sensor on the camera is. In this case, it's going to be older, so assume not good in low light. So you're probably going to want a lens that has either a small aperture number, so like a 2.8 or less, or you're going to want to put more light in the scene. And again, are you going to light the scene? How are you going to light it? Do you want to go for a cheaper lighting solution, so maybe putting people near windows, or do you want to buy some lights or get other sort of lighting setup? Do you want to diffuse the light where it looks softer by putting like diffusion cloth in front of it, or do you want more of like a hard light where it's just like the light without the diffusion cloth, so it's more like a less softer light, more of a high contrast difference or whatever? Anyway, so like, what do you want to do for that? So you have the GH2s, Micro Four Thirds mount, quite good when it comes to adaptability, given that it's a mirrorless camera, right? So there's no DSLR mirror in there, it's just the sensor, right, on the GH2. You just adapt the lenses, micro four thirds, so you could get a lot of different lenses for that, because the full frame lenses, as long as you could adapt them to the mount, are going to cover that sensor. The APS-C lenses, as long as you could adapt them to the mount, are going to cover that sensor. Okay, and so then you could do all that, have them on some cheap tripods, point them at the two different people, and just press record on each camera. Make sure that, you know, you got your audio and everything worked out, and you could start doing something, right? It might not look like the best quality, but if you want to do something, that's a place you could start with. If you want to go even cheaper, maybe you could look at just getting some camcorders. But again, like, what's your quality threshold? What's your budget? Stuff like that, right? So again, if it's on a budget, those are ways you could do it. You could look at other cameras too. Probably the main thing is just that it doesn't have a recording limit. That's going to be probably one of the main things, because you don't want the cameras to stop while going. In terms of powering the cameras, that's another thing. You don't want the cameras to turn off, let alone stop recording, but you don't want them to shut off due to running out of power. So a cheap way you could do it is literally just dummy battery into each camera, and have that dummy battery go to a wall outlet, and just get extension cords and plug them into the wall. That's like the super cheap, run all day power kind of thing. If you want to be a bit more mobile with it, you could hook it up to like some external larger batteries, whether it's like a Sony NPF battery or a V-mount battery, stuff like that. If you want to see more of what a V-mount is, I got a video on a V-mount battery. Feel free to check that out, or just look around on YouTube. There's probably going to be lots of stuff out there. Did I kind of more or less give a game plan here for doing the dual camera, 2-camera interview setup on a budget? I think I gave kind of a hopefully I think that's a pretty good framework for kind of what to think about, where to start. Just focus on, like, you know, camera, tripod, lens, audio, and power, those things. As long as you got those things, then, like, try to do what you can for the lighting, trying to make the lighting good. You could even, you know, do some research or looking into, like, how to light a scene well, or what makes lighting interesting or good or whatever, and just kind of mess around with that. Don't think that you need, like, the best quality lights right at the beginning. Just, like, something that's ideally just good enough, even if it's like a window with, like, you know, those kind of thin, you know, kind of semi-transparent white drapes, something to kind of soften the light a little bit. Or maybe it's a cloudy day and the light's already diffused a little bit. You know, just try to kind of get creative with it, thrifty, you know. Anyway, I'll end that there. Thank you guys for watching. Have a good day.